I'm a Master's of Science student over in the Forestry department. I'm almost done with my degree. I'm waiting to set my defense date sometime in January, so I'm getting really close to being done. I'm very excited. I'm not going to talk a lot about the research that I've been working on for the past 2.5 years, but it involves some acoustic telemetry stuff, which I'll touch on. But if anyone has any questions more specifically on my research, please feel free to ask me after the presentation. So thanks so much for coming today. Like Nicole said, I'm here to talk to you about why salmon are so cool. And one of the reasons I think that salmon are so cool is because they are found both in freshwater as well as the ocean. And this means that they're using two really different environments. That gives us cool opportunities to study fish in both these places. So I get to go out into the marine world, but I also get to hang out in the freshwater world. And as a researcher, I really like that. I think that's really cool. But they're amazing animals. They make these big migrations that have to take them back and forth. But there's a lot of other reasons why salmon are cool, and so I hope that all of you can find some of the reasons you like today. So I have my friend here, Loki the salmon. He's a puppet. And so Loki's going to help me tell the story about salmon. And basically, we're going to follow Loki on his life cycle from when he was born to when he spawns. And we're going to see all the things that Loki has to face as a salmon, because he's a pretty amazing creature. So to begin with, Loki is a Pacific salmon. And Pacific salmon live along the coast of North America. And they're anadromous. This means that they're born in freshwater, migrate to the ocean, and then return to freshwater to reproduce. And so there's 5 species of Pacific salmonids, and all of them have nicknames. So with the common name, I'm going to give you their nicknames if you haven't heard them before. So pink salmon are actually the most common salmon that you can find. They're the most abundant of the 5 species. They're also the smallest, and they are called humpies because it's hard to see on this picture, but they get, my laser's hard to see, but the males get really big humps on their back, about the size of dinner plates sometimes. We also have sockeye salmon. Our friend Loki here, he's a sockeye salmon. And they're the second most common species of Pacific salmon. They're called red salmon, obviously, because they turn bright red when they're spawning. Chum salmon are the 3rd most common salmon that you can find, and they're also called dogfish. I believe they're called dogfish, unfortunately, because people don't really choose chum as their choice of preference to eat. So they're kind of known as the dog of the salmon. Coho is the next most commonly found salmon, and they're also known as silver salmon. And I think in British Columbia, both sockeye and coho are sometimes referred to as bluebacks as well, another nickname. And then Chinook is known as the king or the spring salmon, and they're the least abundant. But they're called the king salmon because they can get really, really big. So as I said before, salmon are anadromous. That means that they move between freshwater and the ocean. And so before we follow Loki on his life journey, I just want to give everyone like a quick background on the life cycle of salmon. So adults lay their eggs in the gravel of freshwater rivers, and juveniles rear and spend about 1 to 2 years in rivers or lakes. And this varies a little bit on species, but most species spend some time in the freshwater river. And then fish decide to go to sea, so they undergo a lot of physical and physiological changes, and they head to the ocean. In the ocean, they spend about 2 to 3 years where they're eating a lot of food and they're growing really big, and then they decide to come home and spawn again. So then they leave the ocean, come back to the river where they were born, and then reproduce. And so, as I said before, Loki's a sockeye salmon. So he was born with about 3,500 other brothers and sisters. However, the survival of salmon at this life stage is low. So only about 12.7%, so almost 13% of those eggs will survive to become fry that live in the freshwater. So that means that Loki will be one of 444 eggs that will survive to the next life stage of the 3,500 other brothers and sisters that he began with. Eggs don't have a lot of predators. Once they're in the gravel, they're hard to reach. However, there are a lot of things that can influence the survival of eggs, such as water temperature, gravel size, and the amount of oxygen flow. All right, so after the eggs hatch, they come into the gravel. And every species is a bit different, but sockeye were spending about a year in a lake. And basically, they're in the lakes to feed and to grow, but they also have to try to avoid predators. So in the bottom picture, we have a pike. That's eating a much larger fish, but pikes and bass are in freshwater rivers and lakes that are commonly eating salmon. So like I said, Loki will be one of 444 salmon that will migrate to the lakes. And they live there for a year. However, fish can only grow so big in the lake. There's only so much for them to eat and feed on, and there's only so much space for them to grow. So at some point in time, they're going to decide that they're going to go to the ocean. And survival from, when they decide that they're going to go to the ocean, we call those smolts. And the survival from becoming a fry to smolt is 25%, almost 26%. So now of the 3,500 brothers and sisters that Loki was born with, he'll be only one of 114 fry that will survive to become a smolt. So our numbers are decreasing already, and we haven't even entered the ocean. So Loki and his friends are all getting ready to swim to the ocean. And this is my favorite stage of the life cycle salmon, is the juveniles and the smolts that decide to make this transition. And they go through a process called smoltification. And no one's really sure exactly what controls this or what makes salmon think that, okay, it's time. I'm going to the ocean. I need to get ready. But it's based on the amount of daylight that you have, the time of year, and the water temperature that there is. So what happens is that fish change the way that their body looks. So you can see this upper picture. This would be a fish that is living in a lake, and this is a fish that's ready to go to sea. So they become this really silvery, shiny color, and they actually start to lose their scales as they're getting ready to go out to the ocean. They also change their behavior. Smolts are now beginning to school a lot more when they're doing their migration downstream, and there's fish that are starting to become territorial. So there's a lot of changes that are making. They're also changing how their gills function. So in freshwater, there's not a lot of salt. So the enzymes in gills pump salt from the freshwater into the fish's body. But when the fish goes to the ocean, it's surrounded by salt everywhere. So what it does is it actually reverses its enzymes, this pumps in its gills, so that it pumps salt out of its body. And that's a really amazing thing that happens. And you think about all these changes that are made, and not only do fish, juveniles, smolts make this when they go to the ocean, but then adults have to do the same thing all over again to come back into freshwater. So they're pretty cool, and they are very adapted and do what they do very well. So at this point in time, Loki the salmon and his 100 other brothers and sisters are going to sea, and it becomes really difficult to follow where fish are going. They're making these migrations that can be thousands of kilometers long. So how do you track where these fish are going? How do you know what's going on? And this is the real challenge in understanding salmon and what they do and where they go. And so one researcher said it's like counting moving trees underwater. So fish are difficult to find, they're difficult to see, and they're difficult to follow. Especially if you're thinking about trying to catch a fish in a river or an ocean, it's going to be really hard to find that one fish out there. So how do we figure out where fish are going? Well, there's been this really cool technology that's developed called telemetry. And telemetry is used to locate animals in space and time. And so what we do is we put tags on animals that emit a signal. And this signal allows us to follow where the animals are going. So has anyone been to the Vancouver Aquarium? Yeah, a lot of you guys, great. Have you guys seen an organization called POST? I know that they have a whole display in the Vancouver Aquarium. Is anyone familiar? No, not really? Okay, well, I'll tell you a little about POST. So POST stands for the Pacific Ocean Shelf Tracking Project. And it's an organization that has allowed telemetry to occur in North America. But you can see that we have receivers. There's a receiver line from San Francisco all the way to Alaska. So we can track tag animals in this whole range. And salmon aren't the only ones being tagged. Sturgeon are being tagged. Turtles are being tagged. All kinds of sharks are being tagged. All kinds of animals in ocean and freshwater environments are being tagged and followed. That is just one type of organizations. There's these organizations that are around the world, in Australia, New Zealand, South America. You can find these types of organizations everywhere. But I think it's pretty cool that POST is based out of the Vancouver Aquarium. And we have these listening lines that are specific to North America here. So these active tags are used to study fish. And it allows us to make some ideas about what an entire population of fish is doing. You can tag a small subset of animals and get an idea of generally what everybody is doing, where they're going. And we can get a better idea, as the video said, where fish are going, their survival rates, their swimming speeds, how long it takes them to get from point A to point B. So there's a lot of information that can be used. There's 3 types of tags that are considered active tags. We have a radio tag, an acoustic tag, and a satellite tag. And these tags all vary in size, and some are better in freshwater, some are better in saltwater. So it really depends on the species that you're studying and the questions that you want to ask, what tag you decide to use. There's generally 3 different types of tag attachment. There's external. So in external tagging, the tag is usually placed by the dorsal fin of the fish. In gastric tagging, as that's where the tag is put down the esophagus of the fish. And so this is commonly done with adult salmon, because adult salmon, when they migrate back to freshwater, they don't feed anymore. And so they're not using their stomachs. And the gastric tagging is really fast, and it's very non-invasive. And so 30 seconds and you can have a tag in the animal. However, for smolts, if we wanted to tag and track smolts, gastric isn't really a good option for us. Because the fish are still growing and they're still eating, and so to put something down their throat is going to be too invasive. It's not going to allow their body to expand with them, or could possibly stop the food. So the implantation method we use to tag smolts is internal tagging, and so it's actually a surgical internal process. Acoustic telemetry is commonly used to study salmon because the signal works both really well in freshwater but also saltwater. And that allows us to track fish on this migration that they're making. And tags are based on battery size. So typically, larger batteries mean a larger tag. I've actually heard that the hearing aid industry is driving the technology for battery size. And so the smaller batteries we can use that are commonly used in hearing aids, those types of batteries are being deployed in these tags, so we can have smaller tags. Because you can see here are 3 different size tags in comparison to a 120 millimeter fish. And so, you know, that's a pretty big fish. We could get all 3 tags in there. But if you were tagging a really small fish, you're not going to be able to put a really big tag in the animal. And so I'll just pass these around. I would like these tag backs. These aren't actually, they're dummy tags. So they're the same weight and same length as real tags, but there's actually no electronics in them. But anyway, I can pass, there's 3 different sizes here for you to look at. So these are the tags I was using in my research. So I'll just put them you guys can pass them around to each other. And you can see the different sizes. And imagine if you're a fish this big and now you're getting a big tag in you, how you'd feel about that. So once tags are implanted, we can track fish, follow them, see where they're going. So Loki, our friend, he was one of 114 smolts to leave. So survival from being a smolt to becoming an adult is 13%. So this means out of Loki's 3,500 other brothers and sisters, he's one of only 15 fish that will survive to become an adult. Now that's pretty amazing. If you think about the millions of salmon that we still have around, they go through so much. And so it's pretty amazing that only 15 fish out of a couple thousand will live to the very end. So salmon are way cool. This is a map of the Fraser River, BC. And I just basically wanted to illustrate that. Let me get my pointer. Can you guys see my pointer up here? Some of these smolts and adults are making really big migrations. So they're coming all the way up here, going down through the Fraser, making this big turn, coming out, getting into the Strait of Georgia, and then they continue up and go to Alaska, spend a couple years there and come back. But so this journey is an incredible journey that these fish are making. They're going thousands of kilometers. So they're pretty tough. And our fish are lucky in the Fraser River in BC. We don't have a lot of dams for these fish to be going through. If you're a fish in the Columbia River in Washington, you could possibly have 8 different dams that you have to pass to get to the ocean. So you can see all these dams are marked. So here's my pointer. There's the Snake River. We have Lower Granite, Little Goose. Look at all these dams that you could have to go through to basically spill over or go around through their juvenile program to get to the ocean. So again, these fish are doing really, really amazing things. And once they get to the ocean, they have to face a whole new suite of predators that they haven't seen before. So in freshwater and saltwater, we can have predation by a lot of birds. So we have eagles, terns. There's large colonies of terns in the Columbia River that they estimate millions of smolts every year. We have mergansers and cormorants. And so today I brought an example of a merganser here. So I'm just going to talk about a little of why the merganser is so apt to catching fish. And you guys can all come up and see these. And then to go with the merganser commonly eats, it'll get anything it goes, but I know it likes juvenile coho. So I have some juvenile coho here for you guys to look at after my talk. So these are fish-feeding ducks, so they can actually swim and dive underwater. And you can see that their beak, they have a lot of really sharp teeth on their beak, and that lets them grab the fish and catch them easily. Then they also have the webbed feet so that they can swim really well underwater. And you can find mergansers in both freshwater but also saltwater. So in large rivers, mergansers will typically float down a few miles down the river, and then they'll dive and swim all the way back up, catching fish. And so mergansers are specifically preying upon smaller fish. They wouldn't be eating an adult. An adult is too big for a merganser to catch. But so they're targeting fish when they're these little guys trying to make it to sea. So that's one of the predators that you could have. And you can see they're good. They're good at catching fish. But then when they enter the ocean, they have all kinds of new predators that they have to face. So seals eat fish, killer whales eat fish. And so there's all these new things that you have to face. I know that in the Columbia River, they actually have problem animal seals. They've identified certain individuals who hang out at the bottom of dams and wait for the smolts to come over. So there's about, I think last year, or maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago now, they identified 15 animals that were like their largest culprits, that they tag the animals, they see where they are, and so, they're known, they're smart. Seals and birds will commonly follow fishing boats because they know that fishing boats catch fish. They know that they can get the, whatever escapes from the nets, so these animals are smart. Killer whales actually are very selective. They are really good at identifying Chinook salmon, so the biggest ones. They're also really good at identifying the females, because if you can eat the eggs from a female, that's a lot more energy than if you just get a male. So they're actually really good, and it's not totally known how they figure it out, but for somehow they can figure out who's a female, who's a male, and what species you are, and they can be very selective. But there's entire populations of killer whales that will feed just on Chinook salmon. So I think that's pretty impressive. So as I said before, when adults are in the ocean, they're spending 2 to 3 years there. Their purpose there is to feed and to grow really big. And the pictures I showed you earlier of all the 5 different species, those were the species in their spawning colors, when they're all nice and pretty. Really, when all fish are in the ocean, they look like the silver color. And at this point in time, they're kind of called the immature adults, and it's really hard to tell species apart because they all look like this very silver kind of color, and they can all be about a similar size. But so they spend a few years there, they're feeding and growing. And also, I guess important to note is that all species are kind of mingling in the ocean together. And you have species, all 5 species, but then all different populations from California to Alaska that are intermixing. And somehow all these fish have to go to the ocean and then just have to figure out where they came from and go back to their own river where they were born. So fish will decide that, okay, I've spent my time, I'm really big, I'm going to be able to have a lot of babies, so I'm going to turn around and I'm going to head back to freshwater. They stop feeding and they invest all of their energy into reproduction. And so this is also an incredible thing that fish do, is to stop eating anything, to put all their energy into reproduction, and to find they're all the way from Alaska all the way back up to wherever river they came from. And they have to go through all those changes again in their body shape, their body size, and their physiology. So changing their gills to revert back to freshwater now. So it's not fully understood how adult salmon are able to find their way home. There's been a lot of research into it. The 2 biggest things we know is that they are using magnetic fields and they're using the sense of smell. And so when in the coastal ocean, so near shore and then in rivers, you'll see a lot of salmon jumping. They call them porpoising. And not totally sure, but people suspect that they're, kind of trying to get up and take a lay of the land, see where they're going, maybe get some extra smell that they can't get in the water. But you do see this porpoising behavior a lot, and so fish are trying to find their way home now. And their migration, so now they faced all those predators earlier, now they have to come back and they're facing new predators. Now they're facing a lot of human predation. So commercial fishing is commonly done in the ocean when fish decide to make this return trip back. Lots of the commercial fishing takes place, so like in BC here, for the Fraser River, takes place in the Strait of Georgia or just outside the Strait of Georgia. So there is payoff for how far you take your boat, how much gas and money and time you're spending, and how much fish you'll catch. And then, yeah, I guess that's the point I want to make, is that fish are caught when we eat fish, we're caught in that silver phase, when they're nice and silvery. They haven't changed colors yet. So not only do they have to escape all the nets from commercial fishermen, but they have to escape all the recreational fishers too. And you'll see this all the time. On the Fraser River, there's people that stand shoulder to shoulder and fish all day. It's a really big, it's one of the biggest incomes that BC has is recreational fishing, especially during salmon season. But not only do they have to continue worrying about human predators, they also have to remember that there's now other things that want to eat them, like bears. We've all seen that, classic Discovery Channel where bears are just swimming and diving and getting all the salmon they can eat. And there are a lot of animals that depend on the salmon coming back for them to eat as well. So if Loki, our friend here, can make it past all the commercial fishermen, the killer whales, the seals, the birds, the recreational fishers, they will come back and they will spawn. And so when fish get ready to spawn, this is when they turn those really bright colors and they get really cool body changes. So as I said, pink salmon before, they get a really big hump on their back. That hump is like the size of a dinner plate. It's a really big hump. And they do that to impress the females. The males generally become a little bit brighter than the females, again, to attract them. The males also grow these really crazy hooked snouts and get really big teeth. And that's for fighting, that's for territory, so that they have a chance to mate with females. And salmon die after they spawn. So they've gone through this 4-year life cycle, and they've worked so hard, and they get one shot to make it happen. Typically, a female will dig, I think, around 3 to 4 nests. And that's it. They made this really big migration. This is their shot. And if there's anything that slows down their migration or harms them in any way, there are fish that get all the way to this point and then are not able to spawn or die because they're too tired or because the water's too hot. And so there's all these things that they have to face. And it's pretty amazing to think that out of 3,500 fish, this guy will be one of 15 fish that is successful in his life. But salmon, they're the fish that keeps on giving. So after they die, they give nutrients back to the ecosystem, which I think is a really, really cool thing. So we have a lot of bears and coyotes, especially in BC. There's some populations of bear and coyotes that feed strictly on salmon, nothing else. But what they do is they typically catch a salmon and they drag it away from the riverbank, and they'll take it hundreds of feet away from the river. And they don't always eat the whole fish. So then as the fish is decomposing, the body is actually giving back nutrients that it brought from the ocean, and it's depositing that into the landscape. And so there's been scientific studies that have shown that this deposit of salmon nutrients from the ocean helps plants grow, so it increases the diversity, the types of plants that are there, and it helps them grow. They increase their growth a tremendous amount just by getting nutrients from these salmon. And that's one of the things that's so cool. Salmon are found in 2 different environments. They have this amazing migratory life cycle that they have to go through. And they're also a really important indicator of your watershed health. So salmon need clean, cold water to survive and live, and they're also giving back, adding nutrients to that. So if you have a population that's wiped out, your ecosystem's not going to be as healthy because you're not having these nutrients that are being brought back anymore. So that's kind of the end to my talk. I hope that I've convinced you guys today that salmon are really cool, and I hope that everyone has found something that they really enjoy about salmon. Again, they live incredibly difficult lives. They face these amazing challenges, and they're just really cool animals. And it's amazing that today, you know, a couple years ago, we had a run of 10 million salmon. It's amazing that that can still happen. I think that's really great and really cool when you think about everything that they go through. So what are some ways that we all can help protect and conserve salmon? So one of the most important things is maintaining a healthy watershed. So as I said, salmon need cold, clean water to survive. So there's different communities that will organize with their neighborhoods to plant trees for a day. If you can plant a tree by a waterside, it not only filters the water, so it helps keep the water clean, but it's going to provide shade, so it keeps the water cool for fish. Don't pour chemicals down the drain of your house or on the street. All drains on the street lead to the ocean. There's not a lot of filtration that goes on, so that's important to think about. You know, it's always important to try to reduce, reuse, recycle. You know, buy your own coffee mug so you're not always throwing paper mugs away. And you can become with different organizations for your watershed, your local watershed. The videos I was showing earlier from the Seymour Salmonid Society, they take tons of volunteers, and they could help you get interested. If you're interested in water issues or protection issues, they can let you know some of those things better. And then they also have cool opportunities, like the whole release and tagging I showed you. They have volunteers that help and go do that release. So there's ways that you could get involved with salmon and do some really cool things. I used a lot of photos in this presentation today, so I just want to give special thanks to all those people I used photos from. Well, thanks so much for coming and listening to me, you guys. I really appreciate your time.